Hello everyone! In this lesson we're going to set up the URL pattern for a single individual blog post. Let's jump into the action. And actually, before we set up that new URL pattern, let's first think about the user experience for creating a post. So if I go to the Create Post screen, we know that if you leave either of these fields blank, it's going to fail and just send you right back to this exact same screen. Well, you can see the client-side validation prevented me from even submitting the form because just in the HTML we have the required tag. That is a good start, but you can't fully trust client-side validation like that. So let me show you what I want to do. Open up your Create Post template, so Control or Command P, create-post.blade.php. Cool, so around line number 7 we see the title input. So for example, if you removed this required attribute, because that's just client-side, it's not actually truly enforcing anything, but if you save that and then you refresh, now you actually can submit the form. Well, we need to do the same thing for the text area. So on line 12, remove required. Hit save. If I refresh, now if I try to submit the form, you can see it doesn't actually create it. It just sends us back to this same URL. Cool. Now we can add those HTML required tags back in just a moment, but what I want to show you right now is what if you only left one of the fields blank? So for example, if we typed in a value for this, but we left title blank and tried to submit, well, the user would have just lost everything they typed into this field. So let's add a bit of basic validation, and also let's include their old sticky values if they did fill out one field. So essentially, on this input for the title, I would just say, give it a value attribute, value equals quotes, in the quotes, double curly brackets, and then just call the old helper function, give an argument of a string of text, and the field name is title. I would just do the same thing for the body text area. Now, text areas have a matching closing tag, so instead of giving it a value attribute, in between the opening and closing tags right here, I would just have double curly brackets, call old, and it's for body. Cool. Let's also set up the error messages right below the field that say, hey, this field is required. So below the title input, so on this line, I would just say @error, parentheses for title. Below that, @end error. In between, open up a paragraph tag and just have double curly brackets, $message. On the opening P tag, I would give it a class of m-0, small, alert, alert-danger, and shadow-sm. To save typing, I would just duplicate these 3 lines for the body field below. So below the text area, just paste that in, change the error for body. Cool. Let's give this a save, and now if you refresh, and if I leave title blank but fill in body content and submit, awesome, we don't lose that value. But we do see the validation message for title. Cool, so now I could say, my second blog post. I could leave this old sticky value, or if I wanted to actually enter a real value, did you know that 2 + 2 is 4? Go ahead and save that. Cool, it's in the database now. At this point, let's think about what we want to do next. So instead of being taken to this awkward Create Post screen where it just says, hey, it would make way more sense. It would be way more intuitive if we redirected the user to the new URL for that new post. In other words, you create a brand new post like this, I think it should take the user automatically. We should just redirect them to a URL of, for example, like /post/ and then whatever the ID number for that new post is. Just redirect them to that URL. Let's go with an ID of 1 because if you look in your database in the posts table, everyone hopefully now has at least one example blog post in their post table, right? So the first one has an ID of 1. The one I just created a moment ago has an ID of 2. The idea is let's set up this URL pattern, right, of /post and then / the ID number. Now, if I try to visit this URL right now, obviously that fails. So let's go set up this route pattern right now. So open up web.php, so Control or Command P, web.php, your routes file. And down here under blog post related routes, let's add a brand new route. To save a bit of typing, you could actually duplicate this GET request for Create Post. So just duplicate that, place it down here. Now for the URL pattern, we're going to do something different. So let's say /post slash, and then this would be, the ID number for a blog post. But to have that be dynamic, we can just have curly brackets. And in those curly brackets, let's say post. We can circle back later in the lesson to why we're choosing a name of post in these curly brackets. But for now, just know that this is dynamic. Laravel will know which post to look up because we included this. Cool. Now on our post controller, let's create a new method, or let's call a new method. We haven't created it yet, but in these quotes, let's call it maybe view single post. Let's give this a save. And now let's jump into our post controller and create this method. So controller command P, search for post controller. Up at the top or down at the bottom, let's add a new public function with the name of show single post. Parentheses, curly brackets. Now, you could return a string of text as a test, but let's not even waste time doing that. We know that we would want to show a new Blade template, right? And if you look in your HTML templates folder, the folder where we're borrowing static HTML from, well, as you might have guessed, I want us to borrow code from this post.html file. Now, I actually totally forgot about this, but you might remember in an earlier lesson when we were first learning about Blade templates, remember I had us create a few sample templates, and one of the ones we created is actually named singlepost.blade.php. Now, if you don't have this file in your views folder, that's okay. You might have skipped that example exercise from a few lessons ago. That's okay. Essentially, all I did was just go into this post.html file where we would be borrowing HTML from, and if you go into this Blade template, singlepost.blade.php, remember, we just have the X layout sandwich, and then what goes in the middle of the X layout sandwich? Just the code that lives in between the header and footer in that file that we're borrowing code from. Anyways, this is the Blade template that we would want to use for that single post URL. So back in postcontroller.php, let's just say return view, semicolon, and the name is single-post. Let's give this a save, and now in our browser, if you try to actually visit, /post/ and then a number like 1 or 2, oops, we get an error screen. You can see I didn't choose the exact same method name in my routes file that I actually named it in my controller. So view single post, you can see in my controller I accidentally named it show single post. So just change that to whatever you named it in your routes file. So view single post. Save that. If we refresh the URL, awesome. So now our next task is to make this content actually be dynamic instead of just a hard-coded HTML template, right? So for example, if you change this to 2, whatever ID for the post you show here, we want to show that title, that body content, that author, the posted on date, so on and so forth. So the question becomes, within our view single post function, how do we load the appropriate blog post data from the database, right? How do we load the blog post in question? The code to make this happen is very simple, very minimal. This is another reason why Laravel is awesome. However, I've seen that in far too many Laravel guides and tutorials, the instructors really speed over and gloss over this concept of what I'm about to show you. So I really want to take the time so that whatever we put as a parameter here in these parentheses, I want this to truly make sense. Because when I first learned Laravel, this was something that really confused me. And I feel like if you can truly understand what we're about to do, it's going to open up so many doors for you. So how are we going to load the appropriate data from the database? It actually starts back in our routes file. Remember, I said that we would circle back and address, what's in these curly brackets. So it doesn't have to actually be named post here. And just to truly prove a point here, I want you to name this to pizza. Rename it to pizza just to prove a point. Okay, give that a save and then go back into your post controller. Now, in the parentheses for our view single post method, I want you to have just one parameter, and let's say $, and don't name it pizza. I want to prove a point here. Name it $unicorn, something totally different. But then in our function, just return $unicorn. You can comment out the return view line for now. Just go ahead and save this. You don't even need to comment it out because you can only have one return in a function. But if you save that and refresh, you see the number. Let me zoom in for you. You're just going to see whatever number you placed up in the address bar. So if I type 1, that's what we see, right? If I type the word hello, that's what we see. So nothing magical is going on, right? This is just literally whatever value, whatever sort of this wildcard variable in the URL, that's what we're accessing. Let me put this back to a number of just 1. Cool. So the idea here, though, is that that is the post ID value, right? A value of 1 or a value of 2, that's the post ID that we would want to look up data for in the database. So in terms of what we're passing from the route into our function, though, nothing magical is going on. We're passing in sort of one variable, whatever this incoming dynamic value is, and then we have one parameter. So this is nothing new, right? It doesn't matter what the programming language is, like in JavaScript, for example. You can name your incoming parameter here whatever you want, right? Like you could call it $X, or we called it unicorn. It's not matching what we named it here. We named it pizza. However, if you make the names match and we start to use the power of a model, Laravel can do all sorts of cool things for us and perform database lookups for us. So check this out. In these parentheses, get rid of $unicorn, and instead we're going to say uppercase post, right? That's our post model, space, and then let's say $pizza. So in other words, we're matching the name that exists in our routes file, right? This hollowed out variable part. We're matching that. And what's going on here, this syntax is called type hinting. We're hinting to Laravel that whatever this incoming value is, we want to interpret it through the lens of what is a blog post, our post model, or sort of fill in the concept, the metaphorical concept of what a blog post is with this incoming value. Now, when we do this, something special happens. Laravel can look up the appropriate post in the database just based on this incoming ID value. Now, here's where things get really, really cool. In the body of our function, we don't need to query the database. Laravel will already do it for us. That's the power of a model. So you could literally just say return, our lowercase pizza and look inside it for the title property, right? The blog post title. So if I refresh, we see my second blog post. If I go for the blog post that has an ID of 1, we see my first post. This is awesome. So hopefully that makes sense to you. If you want to use the power of type hinting and Laravel models like this and let Laravel automatically look up the appropriate row in the database, you do need this parameter name to match the incoming variable from your route. But there's nothing special about the name, they just need to match. Having said that, I don't actually want this to be pizza, so I'm going to change it to post just so it makes sense, right? I'm going to save that, go back into my controller. I don't want this to be called pizza. Let's name it post. We don't need to actually return the blog post title. What we want to do is pass the blog post data into our blade view. So check this out. We just give the view helper function a second argument. We give it an array, and we only need to have one property on the array. Let's call it post equals greater than, and then just give it for the value the lowercase post variable. If we save this, we can now go into our blade, our template, right? Single post blade.php. And we can begin to use those values. So for example, on line 4, we can get rid of the hard-coded title. This would just be double curly brackets, $post, look inside it for a property of title. If you save that, you can refresh. Let me zoom back out a little bit. But awesome, you see that's the real dynamic title value for the blog post that has an ID of 1. If you change that to the blog post that has an ID of 2, awesome. At this point, let's just hollow out all of the other values in this template. So for example, the username of whoever authored the post, the posted on date, and then the body content.